Good morning, everyone. Please, if I could please request you to settle down. Good morning once again. My name is Darshana Barua, and I'm Associate Director and Senior Research Analyst at Carnegie India. Given the presence of India's leading policymakers and innovators in this room today, we at Carnegie India are absolutely thrilled to be able to provide this platform to discuss some of India's burning technology policy issues in India and around the world. Over the course of the next 2 days, you will be engaged. You will be a part of vibrant discussions on a range of variety of issues, including India's technology collaborations and its security imperatives to gene editing, data protection, artificial intelligence, and the digital economy. A few quick housekeeping notes before I welcome our director to offer a few welcome remarks. We are using personalized QR codes for registration. We have 2 days of interesting and engaging conversations over a variety of issues. We have short, dedicated tea and coffee breaks. However, we do have tea, coffee, and refreshments available throughout the day just outside the venue. So please feel free to step out for a quick bite or a cup of coffee. We request you to kindly keep your mobile phones on silent, but do encourage you to use social media to comment and contribute our conversation online. Please stay connected with us on social media through hashtag Global Tech Summit. In case any of you will be unable to make it to any of our sessions later on, please watch the discussions online on our website, carnegieindia.org, and Carnegie India's Facebook page. Given the number of brilliant minds under this roof today, we hope you will take this opportunity to interact with each other and with the speakers. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our director, Dr. Rudra Chaudhuri, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Technology can play a role in enhancing bilateral relationship.
Like we change clothes, the technology is changing.
The history of international affairs is in many ways the history of technology.
The 3 technologies that will change our lives, and it's a requirement, will be artificial intelligence, blockchain, and looking at telecommunication technologies like 5G.
When we want to address problems of climate change or poverty, hunger, disease, we need transformative solutions.
Shift from the tangible to the intangible.
The big countries are following.
The biggest challenge in this country or in the world has been creation of jobs.
India's primary goal should be to see that Indian requirements are built into international standards.
Not only do we share challenges globally, but the solutions to those challenges cannot be achieved by one country alone.
Carnegie India is doing of trying to expressly address this issue of how policy deals with technologies.
Technology intervention for good governance may bring efficiency.
Will create solutions which are very different than if you would have just solved at the surface level.
Today, there seems to be a much broader Japanese thinking on India in evidence.
Talk about one imperative, starting with cybersecurity, but also addressing other imperatives, one in biotechnology and one in artificial intelligence.
We're now entering into a different kind of digital slavery.
The debate helps in identifying what is good about technology, what is bad about technology.
Innovation is everywhere.
Utilizing technology to have a better future is having innovation.
Well, good morning and welcome to Carnegie India's Global Technology Summit 2018. It is a real privilege to be hosting this summit for the 3rd year in a row in Bengaluru, a city that is, by word and deed, India's technology and innovation capital. We live in a time of dizzying technological change. The quickness of technological advancements is indeed both remarkable, but at times alarming. Remarkable, for such developments provide solutions to some of the world's greatest challenges, from informing the future of life sciences, to hacking the microbiome, to converting waste into biofuels, or allowing artificial or augmented intelligence to support more efficient manufacturing solutions, but alarming because of the speed of innovations and the rapid pace of the creation of technological solutions, which is often at odds with the policy frameworks that seek to regulate them. Clearly, technological advancements cannot be considered in isolation of societal concerns. The history of the last many centuries makes certain that technology evolves in response to social and economic needs. Similarly, the ways in which technologies are distributed and applied can be more or less beneficial to more or fewer people, depending on the motivations and rules that society and governments produce. Optimizing the mix requires knowledge networks to mediate this process. Carnegie India's Global Technology Summit aims to provide such a platform, where a variety of networks and ideas can come together under one roof. We aim to provide a space where a balance might be sought between the many innovations that will be discussed over the next 2 days and the extent to which such innovations are accepted in the societies within which they are produced. Our goal is not necessarily to find the balance in the many arguments that will no doubt be had in the next couple of days. It is to allow for the creation of a bridge between optimists and skeptics on any given issue, to hear all sides of the argument, and to allow for a reasoned debate on questions that are likely to determine our futures, whether it is to do with innovation and enterprise on the one hand, and privacy concerns on the other, or the science behind gene editing and ethical concerns with regards to the same, or whether or not machine learning should and could replace the future shape of the workspace. We encourage you to seek out answers, to enjoy the summit, and to remain connected with us as we vow to remain connected with you and this city in our collective journey into the future. On behalf of Carnegie India, we would like to thank those who have made the summit possible, who have been long supporters of Carnegie India as an institution, but also as an institution which hopefully has now connected into the fabric of this wonderful city and the wonderful state of Karnataka. In particular, I would like to thank the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and in particular, the Policy Planning and Research Division within the MEA for their continued support. We could not be more pleased that Ambassador Gitesh Sarma, Secretary West within the MEA, is here with us today. The Government of Karnataka, our host state, and in particular, a very big and important thank you to KITS, Karnataka Information Technology Services. We are deeply appreciative of the support provided to us by Shri K.J. George, Minister of Large and Medium Scale Industry, Shri Gaurav Gupta, Principal Secretary, ITBT and SNT, and Shri Girish, the Managing Director of KITS. Our summit partners, K-Tech, Innovate Karnataka, Facebook, and Biocon. Our session partners, Intel, and in particular, the long support provided to us by Nivruti Rai, Dell EMC, the continued support provided to us by Saravanan, Harman, the support provided by Pradeep Chaudhuri. In particular, especially with regards to this city, we'd like to thank two individuals who've really helped us understand the kind of questions that we seek to answer. Sri Mohan Pai for his generosity and continued support, and Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, Chairperson, Managing Director of Biocon, who will be with us a little later today. Kiran is also a crucial member of the Founders Committee of Carnegie India, and we hope very much with the support of all these individuals, Carnegie India in the next short future will have a permanent presence in this wonderful city. So to conclude, please enjoy the summit, absorb the debates, question everything, and remain connected with us just as we vow to remain connected with you in a variety of ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhuri. We are honored to partner with the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, in creating this platform to bring together policymakers, the technology community, to discuss the key issues of the day. Today, we are delighted to welcome Ambassador Gitesh Sarma, Secretary West, Ministry of External Affairs, to deliver the keynote address and formally open the Global Technology Summit 2018.
Dr. Rudra Chaudhuri, Director, Carnegie, India, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. I bring greetings from the Ministry of External Affairs, and we really look forward to these deliberations. I have particular pleasure to be in Bengaluru for this Global Technology Summit. This city is synonymous with science and technology. This beautiful city is also synonymous with the future. Friends, it is truly humbling and overwhelming to be in the midst of such young people, tech whiz, and also superstars of the world of technology, also from other disciplines, and to be representing a government institution, a ministry, and absorbing everything that you will throw at us. That is something that I really look forward to. You will forgive me if I begin on a somewhat personal note. When I was growing up, I read about diabetes. I had to. A few of my close family members were afflicted by this disease. There are studies suggesting that Indians are genetically more prone to getting diabetes than other groups of people. I read about insulin extracted from animals and that some human beings are allergic to animal origin insulin. Against this backdrop, scientific research had led to synthetic human insulin. It seemed a wonderful response of science to a real need and a real challenge. This is what S&T is expected to do. Incidentally, because I had read so much about this, when this issue came up in my interview board, I believe this might have been decisive in me ending up with the job of a diplomat. Entirely by accident, years back, I moved into a city not far from here. I was a diplomat by then. The mission was to be part of a highly motivated team looking to transform this place, I shan't name it, into a world-class IT and ITES hub. I think we succeeded in achieving this objective to some extent. More importantly, I could see at close hand the potential of IT with its instant communication and data processing capabilities to make a difference to ordinary lives. I was beginning to understand why people talked of death of distance. In 1 second, we are here. In 1 second, we can be there. It's truly remarkable. Almost another half a decade later, there came one more piece of good fortune. I could work in the Department of Atomic Energy. This was a time we were looking to break free of the international sanctions regime, which had held us back for over 30 years in the field of atomic energy. On the one hand, the atom can be manipulated to cause enormous destruction. On the other, the atom can be exploited for such purposes as generation of power, providing potable water, increasing agricultural yields, preserving fruits and vegetables, and treating cancer. It is an awesome feeling. Science can create, science can improve, science can heal, and science can destroy. The choice is ours. Science and technology provide unparalleled opportunities for bettering human lives through achieving increased efficiencies and the promotion of peace, prosperity, and security. Countries must prioritize S&T in order to stay competitive in the global economy. Friends, this is a global summit, and therefore we must try and think in global ways. The fact of life is that those who have technology benefit by denying the same to others, or at least making this process very difficult. It has been said that Smith & Wesson makes all men equal. So why not deny Smith & Wesson to the others? And human nature is such that parity or equality is often not seen as such a great idea. It is unnecessary and waste of resources to reinvent the wheel each time, and therefore there is a need to be part of all international technology regimes which facilitate free flows of technology to us. Friends, it is also necessary to be part of all dialogue processes which shape and set the global agenda. But we must also be part of global efforts to ensure that knowledge does not pass into the wrong hands. India has an impeccable record with respect to export controls. One of the most important achievements of Indian diplomacy in recent times has been to achieve membership of restricted technology regimes. Creative and determined diplomacy in challenging circumstances and joint work with friendly partners led to the waiver given by the Nuclear Suppliers Group, or NSG, in 2008 to India for international civil nuclear engagement. We now look forward to early membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. India has also become member of the Missile Technology Control Regime, the Wassenaar Arrangement, and the Australia Group. There are other concerns as well. Climate and environment issues, for instance, affects each one of us. Next year, we would be celebrating Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birth anniversary. Friends, the greatest leaders are those whose relevance only increases with time. Mahatma Gandhi is associated with non-violence, but he also preached the virtues of simple living, where we are at peace with the environment around us. He said, "The world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed." Recently, UN gave Prime Minister Modi the award 2018 Champion of the Earth. Prime Minister Modi on that occasion said, "We will never be able to tackle climate change without bringing climate into our culture." And that is why India is taking so much action for our climate. The important point here is that our actions and those of others are likely to have global impact. Even if we think we are careful when it comes to deploying technology, we still might be adversely impacting someone else somewhere else. The island of Kiribati, a remote island country in South Pacific, immediately comes to mind. Some of the most friendly people on earth live there. I had a chance to visit several times there. If we do not do something urgently about rising temperatures, Kiribati will surely go underwater in our own lifetime. The people there, the friendly people of Kiribati, know a thing or two of climate change. In 2014, the government of that country leased land in Fiji to resettle its entire population should it submerge under the sea. At the same time, while we think of technology-related issues and the fact that our actions might affect others, there are things to do before we bring the climate issue under control in the way that we want to. We must remember that we have a development agenda as well. If India does not grow fast enough and sustain this growth over a long period of time, we would not be able to adequately deal with poverty. There has to be a balance between growth and protecting our environment. This is where technology people have to step in to find the right solutions which provide employment, increase productivity, and also a right for India and planet Earth. It is difficult to participate in such a meet as this one and not take note of the internet revolution and on this basis the social media revolution. The way we communicate with each other is constantly transforming lives. Sure, there are some who cling to the old ways. Your aunt who simply refuses to get a cell phone and use it. Your colleague who has no online presence. It appears so much challenging when you are just not able to reach them instantly. The majority of us, though, recognize that the future is coming, is on its way. The best way to prepare is not to deny what is happening, but to find a place within it. There may be enough and data on everything, but are we processing this adequately? In our own work as diplomats in foreign offices, I find that there is a greater need for good analysis which makes sense of what is happening. Those who resist the tide of this progress say that they simply miss a time when people actually talk to each other. What they fail to realize, though, is that we have not stopped talking. In fact, we are communicating with each other on a global level more than was ever possible before. It is simply happening in a different way. And though technology-based conversations can sometimes feel cold and unemotional, there is scope for the human element. It depends on us. Friends, the discussions that will take place during this global summit are of great significance. We in the Ministry of External Affairs and others as well will greatly look forward to solutions and ideas and even questions that are likely to emerge from this event. Let me wish you all fruitful deliberations. I would also like to be the first in another way. We are just 2 weeks away from the new year. Let me be among the first to wish you a very happy new year, good health, peace and prosperity in the year to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Sarma, for sharing your thoughts with us. Now, to join the ambassador on stage, I would like to introduce our inaugural panel, Technology and Diplomacy. Technology diplomacy today is at the forefront of India's foreign policy engagements. Many of the issues that we will discuss at the summit today over the next 2 days are not only pertinent within India, but are also some of the key questions at the global stage. Given India's deepening relationship with its strategic partners such as France, Israel, and Singapore, we are delighted to host the next panel to kickstart the conversations at GDS. It is my honor to welcome Ambassador Henri Verdier, Ambassador for Digital Affairs, France, Dr. Ariel Levite, non-resident fellow, Carnegie Endowment, International Peace from Israel, and Dr. C. Mohan, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University, Singapore.
let me welcome you all for this first session. Ambassador Sharma has already started us off down this discussion at the two-day discussion at the summit. This panel is on technology and diplomacy. What I want to begin by offering a few comments, and then we'll go to the three panelists. After that, we'll come for questions from the audience. At the outset, I just wanted to say three things. I mean, one, technological change alters the way societies are organized. For example, the first industrial revolution turned peasants into workers, set up new conflicts between working class and the capital. It also changed the nature of the relationships between key nations, that is, between societies. The countries that adopted the Industrial Revolution first became the dominant powers, and those who came in later had to continuously struggle to adapt to a new structure, to a new hegemony that was already pre-existing. It also alters, a technological change also alters the way the international system is organized. So therefore, today when we're talking about a technological revolution, I think it affects all aspects of society, how one society relates to another society, and the way international system is organized. This also involves developing new rules internally and between states of how do we deal with the new transformation that is unfolding. Today, as we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, the speed of technological change has been far more rapid than we've ever seen before, and therefore the consequences of this rapid transformation of technologies that is taking place is forcing all societies to adapt at a pace that we're not used to. And I think some of the issues that it is that is posing to us, one is, for example, between state and citizen. If the new information technologies offer the kind of capacities to a state that it can become a surveillance state, then the question of state versus the privacy, individual rights, that's one set of issues that we debate. Other is between the state and the corporations. That is, when American Homeland Security demands open access to the back door of your iPhone, what does Apple do? I mean, that argument too has played out. Then we have the corporation versus corporation. When Tim Cook of Apple denounces Facebook and Google for manipulating your data for commercial reasons, we're seeing the kind of tensions that begin to emerge between the major tech companies. Then you have the tension between the state and the non-state actors. Can the non-state actors use the new technologies to destabilize societies? How does the state deal with them? But our focus now is really on the state and state relations, that is relationship between states. We've seen in the last couple of years some very interesting new phenomenon that have emerged. How does one society intervene in another society? The Americans accuse Russia of using Facebook to manipulate the election in the United States. We see the Americans accusing Huawei that the 5G network is all going to be about espionage, therefore we're going to have to block it. We've seen the whole question of the trade wars today has actually become a war on technology-related issues, and it's not just about trade. And then the kind of areas we thought were separate, the trade debates at WTO, and the question of data. The question of data, how we deal with data, is going to be very much part of the largest sets of issues relating to trade. And another set of issues that come is the cross-border data flows. How are we going to manage the flows across border? How much of national, how much of international? What are the rules for data storage? That too has been a debate. And finally, there is the question of military balance. President Putin has said whoever controls AI is going to be the dominant power in the world. A simplistic statement, but it tells you that the technological change today can offer ways in which the balance of power between major powers can be altered. So to discuss some of these issues that have emerged in the last couple of years, let me turn to, we have a very distinguished panel, and I'm not going to introduce them. They're all up there, and you got their details. So let me start with Ambassador Verdier. France, for example, I think is among a growing number of European nations that has embraced the concept of a digital ambassador, that you are supposed to bring in a whole of government approach to dealing with the new issues that have emerged in relation to information and communication technologies. Could you tell us a bit why this job and what does this job entail?
Thank you. I'm very proud to be part of this meeting. I was appointed 3 weeks ago, so it's my first international trip, and I wanted to be in India. It's not, c'est pas par hasard, it's not a hazard. You know, we think in France that we have all to think that, to remember that internet was a political purpose. It was about to empower the people. It was to share education, culture, knowledge, data. And it happens to turn difficult. It's not the same internet than 20 years ago. It's not the same utopia, but it started with an utopia. That's important to remember this. And now we have very huge issues. We have criminality, of course. We have some misusing of internet, cyber attack, cyber terrorism, information manipulation. We will have to face very interesting and new economic issues, big monopolies, but new way to make monopolies. The new monopolies give you resources, and they are monopolies because they give you resources, and you innovate within their system, not because they have the access to the market, because they have the access to the resources. So we have to start a global discussion. It starts as a political utopia, and now we need it geopolitical, and we need a global conversation, a multi-stakeholder conversation, because we cannot think about the future of digital without speaking with the civil societies, with tech companies, with every companies, and with government, and with international organizations. And we think in France that we need an ambassador in charge of this global conversation to put more tech thinking in the discussion, because we cannot speak just with law and just with general principles. It's from tech, it's about tech. You need to know tech. Personally, I started 3 companies, but my predecessor wasn't an entrepreneur, but France seems to think it's a good thing to know about technology. And we will try to unify 4 purposes. We finish with this. I have a huge engagement in global security of the cyberspace. So against cyber, I work about cybersecurity, and we need a global framework, international framework about cybersecurity. I work a lot about content, information manipulation, terrorist content, etc. But we are involved also in internet governance, and that's important because sometimes the security guys forget how internet works and make bad advices in terms of internet governance. We work about human rights, freedom of speech, plurality, open government, open data, and we don't want to lose the initial utopia because it was for the good of humanity, all this revolution. And we work about economic regulation, and not just about taxes, but we will have to face a lot of issues. For example, the platforms workers will be a huge issue. They have no rights. They cannot make a trade union because they are auto-entrepreneur, self-entrepreneur. So we'll have to, and we will try to equilibrate those 4 topics: security, internet governance, human rights, and economic governance.
How do you bring the different agencies, departments in the French government? That must be a problem, right? It's not easy to get different bureaucracies to work together when you face this kind of a transformational technology.
Okay. In my former job 1 month ago, I was in the French state CIO, so I had a huge habit to working with every administration. And we'll see, but what is comfortable with the ambassadors' jobs is that all this administration works, but I speak. So I make the synthesis because I have to speak alone.
You speak for the president?
I speak as the president.
Recently, Paris, there was this International Peace Forum one of the declarations that came out of the Peace Forum was the trust in cyberspace. Now, that is a huge problem. So what does this declaration say? Do you see it as practical? How do we build trust between individuals, corporations, and the governments in cyberspace?
Okay, that's important. You know, when I started my first companies, cybersecurity was a kind of game. You had attack and defense, and it was one against one. And now it's much more complicated. We need a systemic thinking and a systemic organization because, for example, as you saw maybe, we think that we have to deal with the responsibility of private sectors, of systemic actors. We cannot say it's just I was weak, I was attacked, because it can start with my devices or with my network or with my organization. So France tried to propose to this multi-stakeholder scene to define the common framework of a global security. And the Paris call, it's a non-binding call, it's not jurisdictional, but we propose to our partners to recognize that we have some ideas in common, and as I told, we think that we can regulate and discourage hackback, because if we come in a world where every company make his own policy, it will be very complicated. We think that we can start to think about the systemic actors' responsibility and some other propositions. But it's a program to work. We started last week in the OECD about responsibility of private sector, and we will continue in United Nations in a lot of instances.
You came with, I think the French foreign minister was in Delhi a couple of days ago. Yes. One of the agreements that was signed was selling a supercomputer thing to India. I mean,
no,
so
building with India.
Yeah, building with India. So now, where do you see, for example, one of the mandates of your job was to deal with the tech companies on the question of terrorism, etc. So where do you see the main lines of cooperation between India and France in the cyber domain?
Yes, a bit, but my first job is the international negotiation, and the second one is about attractivity, and it's not the main job.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll move to Mr. Levite. Your deep experience in dealing with the kind of cyber challenges that Israel has faced over the years. You and George Perkovich, I see George somewhere in the audience.
In the first row.
I can see him right in front. I mean, you and George wrote this book on cyber conflict. How do we think about cyber conflict? Because traditionally, all of us are familiar with the war of different kinds between nations. Does the cyber conflict is a very different from the kind of warfare that we've known before? What are the ways in which we can think about conflict between states and between states and non-state actors in the cyber domain?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Rudra and the team of this putting together this amazing event, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me walk back for a second in order to try and understand the role of diplomacy in this space and how to actually try and make this a better world through this multi-stakeholder initiatives that have been referred to when Carnegie has joined the Paris call as a couple of weeks ago and so on. I think we need to zoom out. And what George and I were trying to do was to try and look at other technologies and how they have actually transformed the way we think about international relations and some of the implications. So let me very quickly walk us through some of the insights we took away from such an exercise. So we noticed that technology was originally, in virtually every one of these cases, difficult to comprehend, to assess, to understand the implications. And that had a non-linear aspects to it in its evolution. That it proved disruptive on existing order. And while it creates opportunities, it is also unsettling, many. The telegraph and what it did to whatever trading is, for example, etc. And it affects individuals' well-being, professions' well-being, organizations' well-being, and states' well-being. So there is a difficult transition to try and adjust to the new order. It creates subcultures. which again, if you want to try and engage this effectively, is an issue. The progression initially is very slow, but then picks up speed and so on. And global dissemination then happens with those technologies and so on, which again creates a community that you need to engage, which is growing by leaps and bounds once people understand the potential inherent in that technology and so on. And then there is the slow demise and with the cyclical aspect. Initially, it has the aura of being a net positive. Over time, one begins to understand the downsides of it or the unintended consequences and so on. The train infrastructure prior to World War I being a case in point. But we don't fully appreciate all of those downsides that the ambassador was talking about initially. Initially, we're still infused with the belief that this is going to be only for the good. And getting action together requires often that you also see the downsides, not just the positive gains and so on. The crossover between civilian and military or civilian and intelligence is very difficult to get your hands on. So typically what happens is that initially it's governed by one or the other, and then only over time you actually understand it has those implications that go back and forth between these domains and so on. And that governments in all of those technology aspects are playing catch-up role. They're trying to figure out policy, regulation, legislation, and so on, and find it very difficult to catch up with the technological evolution in all of those spaces. I would argue in this space more than others, but we can debate it and so on. And also, there is initially a belief by those who are ahead that they would stay ahead, that they can leverage it for asymmetric advantage. So all of those are not unique to cyber or to the kind of technologies we're now dealing with artificial intelligence and so on. What I think is really happening here is that all of those things that have been unsettling in other cases exist, and there is a series of factors that make it even more daunting to try and come to grips with in this digital space, and I can elaborate on those.
Since your experience, I mean, you directly dealt with Israel's national security. Now, a few countries face the kind of deep existential threats that Israel faces, and Israel had to continuously deal with the challenge. Has the emergence of the new digital technologies has made your challenge more difficult, or has it made it easier to deal with the kind of security challenges that you have?
Well, I think originally the conception was that it was an unquestionable net gain. But net gain from a very broad perspective, a net gain from the perspective of intelligence, military operations, and so on, both domestic and foreign, and a net gain in terms of the industrial opportunities it creates and the economic opportunities more broadly. And here the question was, how does one leverage the original investments made by the Intel and the military and so on to create a whole broad infrastructure base all the way from academia to industry and so on, and leverage this globally for purposes of anywhere that ranges from diplomacy to development. So I would argue that this is still the main framework, except that it has now become clear as time passes on that even less potent players, including non-state players, are becoming increasingly an issue of concern, that the empowerment of individuals is not necessarily always a force for the good and could be quite disruptive in terms of their ability to coordinate, organize, and have a meaningful disproportionate effect based on their capacity to spread the news, to incite others, and so on and so forth. And that I think that increasingly the state is finding itself in a situation which I would argue is somewhat similar to France, where the state is trying to redefine its role of how much should it actually take responsibility for what's happening in the economy and the society writ large. We have had a very centrist background as we went into this, but we have become quite capitalistic, entrepreneurial, and so on. So what would be the proper role of the state, and how you actually bring in the individuals, the organizations, and so on, and create some kind of a coherent structure is something I think the state is grappling with. It's easy to adjudicate on critical infrastructure. It becomes much more difficult when we deal with the rest of what is the proper role of government in a vibrant democracy of a, say, a capitalist entrepreneurial spirit of a global orientation.
One last question to you. I mean, Israel has become a major innovation hub in the world today. I mean, now, innovation today, I mean, requires actually trans-border collaborations, working with other countries. So Israel is engaged in an expansive engagement with other innovation hubs, maybe like Bangalore, other places in the world. How do you reconcile this interdependence that comes with the nature of innovation and the linkages with Israel's determination to maintain control over national security? Are they reconcilable, or can you be very, very focused on self-reliance in security while at the same time be open for engagement, collaboration with other states?
Well, if you were to had one of the Israeli government officials here dealing with cybersecurity, for example, he would say that his main challenge is his inundated request for collaboration, and there is simply a bandwidth issue, right? And therefore you have to prioritize, so India comes higher because of the potential of having a two-way street than some others who are actually more takers than givers in this kind of an exchange. I think the challenges of finding an appropriate role for government to regulate what is legitimate to engage in and what is not is clearly very difficult in digital space. And I think anyone who has been reading the press lately has found that some Israeli companies that were selling technology that could then be used for monitoring mobile phones has become a big issue, even if you sell it to governments and subject to government assurances and so on, except that some of those governments are not exactly beholden to some of the principles that you would consider with principled conduct of the nature that you and I would approve of. But I think that on the whole, the problem has proven easier to handle because there is so much out there in the private space that ought legitimately to be there. So the question the government really has to face is what are those very narrow areas that have such security implications where we need to maintain a much tighter control over and so on. And basically, I think the burden of proof is on those who want to restrict and put out of the basis for the discussion and so on. And clearly the industry and the academia is constantly saying to the government that if you're too heavy-handed, you will stifle innovation, and that will be detrimental to Israel in many ways.
Thank you. Ambassador Sharma, can I come to you? You mentioned in your opening keynote speech all the question of how India needs to protect its interest in the cyberspace. Now, and generally in the technology sphere. In the past, we dealt with the US-Soviet confrontation. Now we look like we're at the beginning of a China-US confrontation. Until now, we had the privilege of, they were friendly to each other, therefore we didn't have a problem. You see that the US-China rivalry beginning to constrict some of the options that we have. For example, the Huawei comes in right away.
I think the situation is somewhat different when we talk of the US and China engagement. China, we speak in a closed room, is seen as more disruptive and less prone to work according to a rule-based arrangement. Whereas India is seen more as being part of a global order which follows certain accepted principles and ways of working. We are also able to integrate with the Western world in terms of technology development and technology applications. In terms of China, it always appears in a strategic context that if China is seen to be gaining in terms of technology, it is seen to be perhaps more threatening for the Western world. But in the Indian context, it doesn't seem to be such a serious or such a challenge to the Western world. In fact, in my own experience when I was working in the atomic energy, for instance, I found that several American institutions they were interestingly looking at India as a source of funding. They were told that in India you can have the technical manpower, and possibly India is a little more prosperous now. Why don't you, engage with them? And some of the technologies which are being developed in American universities, that could be accelerated with the involvement of India. Again, the fact that the IT revolution itself was on the backbone of Indian manpower, I think that did a lot to highlight that we are able to integrate well with the generally Western dominated agenda. So we would not really be seen as such a challenge. I have also seen in certain parts of the world where some very sensitive technologies are being used or being introduced, and with the encouragement of the West. And clearly there was a limitation in these countries to absorb such technologies. It's not just that you give and the others can take it. So there, these countries were encouraged to rope in India. They said, you can't do it on your own, why don't you work with India? And this was not our suggestion, it came from the West. So the scenario, it seems to me, slightly different.
You mentioned one of the success of Indian diplomacy has been to be part of the new export control mechanisms that have existed for a long time. It has taken us almost 4 decades of work to be on the right side when it comes to making global rules on who transfers what technology to whom, under what conditions. Now, are we prepared, is Delhi, the government, prepared to deal with a new emerging situation where the Americans are now talking about imposing export controls on artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, a whole what they call foundational technologies. Are we prepared, are we preparing to deal with potentially a more restrictive environment, because it affects all these people sitting here? Because if the international rules change, then I think it affects us, because unlike the nuclear and space, this current technologies are far more pervasive, far more consequential for Indian economy. So are the new rules likely to affect how we run these technologies at home?
I think there is a need to anticipate this as well. It's not that we are confronted with a situation, but it sounds reasonable that if I have something, I should be interested in the others not having it. So in that sense, we have had a long history of dealing with such situations. I mean, we shouldn't lose sight of the space experience as well, that when we were looking at cryogenic engine technology, I mean, there was an effort to deny us and probably delay our own program. But if you put the right people, give the funding and have clear objectives, you may take your time, but you will get there. So I think most of these tactics or regimes or policies, they work for some time, but at least a country with an industrial base and technological base and kind of manpower base like India would eventually get there. So I think we have had that, we have grown with that kind of, it's not really been motivated by a need to harm India, but just to stay ahead. And every time we have even supercomputers, if you recall many years back, and when we just wanted it for climate studies, I mean, it was not given to us. Our own scientific work got us somewhere along the way. So I think if you say artificial intelligence and other kinds of technologies which are now being developed, I think we will also we are fairly determined, we have proven we are resilient, we would be able to take in the kind of pressures that come with such programs, and I think we will come out also reasonably successfully.
I just want to ask all three of you one question, maybe for short answers, and then we go to the audience. Maybe we have time for a few from the audience. Now, looking ahead, are you seeing a more restrictive environment? Because, if you see generally there was an expectation all of us can sit together, that is the world can sit together, maybe ban robotic weapons, create, Microsoft wanted a cyber code of conduct. Are you looking, do you expect a more confrontational international environment in relation to technology, which means there are going to be camps, there's going to be national controls, there's going to be harder for the system world as a whole in Geneva or Vienna or New York to work together. So is that the likely outcome, or there is going to be some cooperation where we can deal with how to deal with whether it's robotic weapons, whether it is preventing militarization of artificial intelligence, on these kind of issues? Where do you see the needle moving towards greater conflict or more cooperation?
First, we can see that the problems will be more and more complicated. It's not just anymore about video games. It's about smart cities, it's about transportation, it's about the global life. Software is eating the world. So it's about the global world. So it will be more and more complicated and with more and more important issues. I think we start to cooperate, so maybe we can be hopeful, but it will be hard. And for example, we can see that big countries or continents like Europe tend to proclaim that their laws are extraterritorial. But we don't know how we will deal with this. They just proclaim, Europe also, the RGPD is extraterritorial. And we have no mechanism to deal with this. So we will try, and a global conversation did start, and that's a good news, but we'll have to face huge issues.
Are you optimist or pessimist when it comes to international systems?
I'm both. You wouldn't expect a different answer from an Israeli, would you?
Yeah.
So let me say the following. On the one hand, I believe that we're heading for a much more fiercely competitive environment. And in some ways more unruly too, because I think the government's ability to actually control that space or influence the space, any government on earth, is increasingly challenged. And therefore, governments could and should play a role, but governments would find it very difficult to do interstate arrangements the old-fashioned way. So that's, if you wish, the bad news. I think the good news are in two areas. Those who have a stake in the digital economy, and I deliberately frame it as the digital economy, would clearly find that notwithstanding their competitive spirit and the adversarial aspects and so on, they have to cooperate. And I would certainly put China in that camp, notwithstanding the security tensions within so on. So with India, it's trivial, but I also believe China belongs there. And I think Russia still has to sort its way out through this conundrum. And the second, which I think would be very important to get an input from India, in particular, not to exclude from the first, is where you would get the private sector to actually step up and harmonize what they would consider not just legal, but ethical, acceptable practices and so on as technology. And I think we're seeing that budding. And so my hope is partially on this aspect of market-based mechanisms out of self-interest, not just out of conviction of what is the good out there. I'll give you one example. Insurance companies and the role they could play in harmonizing requirements. But I think I already detected enormous potential here in India to actually say we should try and tell ourselves what we would consider legitimate, reasonable ways to do it, and where we're not sure, let's proceed with some degree of caution. And in extreme cases, consult the governments. But first and foremost, the responsibility resides with us, because regulation and policy would come late, may be incoherent, may be conflicted, and so on, and may not be very constructive.
Thank you. Where do you see it going? I mean, on a positive direction or a negative direction?
Now, I would say that there is a growing understanding that we need to work together. So that is the positive side. Security, I think, has become is a major challenge. There are some countries seen to be deviant, and you cannot ignore that we may need to come together And there are also what we have been saying non-state actors. The technologies on offer are available not only to states, but they percolate down to individual groups or individuals or even non-state actors acting in very motivated formations. So I think no country can afford to go alone. So I see positive aspects that we will tend to work together, that it is for the common good. Otherwise, the power of destruction at our disposal is such that there will be no second chance.
Thank you. Now, we got about 5 minutes. We can take maybe first round of 3 questions, and then we'll go back to the panelists. Lady at the back. If you can make it brief so that we just have very little time.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Tanvi. I'm a blockchain lead at Ernst & Young. And my question is for Andre. So France has been pretty progressive in blockchain and crypto regulation, and they came out with this new ICO framework recently as well. So at a time when other countries are very hesitant on crypto, could you talk about the process you follow internally to assess these technologies and also build a perspective on them?
Just hold your thought. I'll just going to get 2 more. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Yeah, this side. You're getting it this side, Rakesh.
Thank you, Rakesh. You know, during the previous century, there were 2 major technologies that got developed, the nuclear technology and space. Now, both were dominated by government. And therefore, during the 60s and 70s, there were negotiations which were controlled by governments, export controls in both areas, and so on. Today, the technologies that you've been talking about, whether it is what has been spawned by the internet, whether it is AI, robotics, gene editing, and so on, these technologies are not under government control. So a whole different model of negotiation for any kind of monitoring, control, etc., regulation is needed. And how does that happen? And I look at the ambassador here, Ambassador Verdier, because it is part of his job. So what is the thinking on this? We hear this term multi-stakeholderism. What exactly does it entail?
Okay, one more. Yes, sir, please.
This is addressed to Mr. Sharma. Sir, during your keynote address, you mentioned that there is a greater need for analysis of what's happening. There is a greater need for analysis of what's happening. Kindly elaborate on this.
Okay, I think let's go to the panel. Feel free to answer all the questions. I mean, we'll start with you, Ambassador.
They are very difficult questions for 1 minute. So let's just say that first we have to create the agenda, because a lot of these issues were not on the agenda. For example, in the Paris Internet Governance Forum 2 weeks ago, we saw clearly that a lot of those actors didn't want to speak with governments and said, are you legitimate to speak about internet governance? So President Macron explained that, okay, we are in charge of the security of our citizens and freedom of our citizens, and we cannot explain to them that we just wait for auto-regulation of the digital economy. And okay, we started a conversation about this. About security, it's the same. So it's a problem of, let's create the agenda, let's start the conversation, and then let's find a good balance, of course. And in France, as you know, the National Security Agency for Cyber Security make just defense. So they are very, very pro-cryptography, because they think that it's impossible to really protect a company without cryptography. Maybe if they made also attack, maybe they would think differently, but okay, we know clearly that we need a good balance. A backdoor is a backdoor for everyone, not just for the authorities. So we have to be very cautious about this kind of topics.
Since the question was posed to me directly, I would say even in my experience of working in the diplomatic space, that in the old days, even 30 years back, getting newspapers, getting their translations, getting social media, the kind of reactions people have to set of policies or developments, that took a very long time. And if you were locked up in a country like North Korea or somewhere else, probably information might come much later, after which you may not be in a position to really decide things. Today, instantly you get access to information. Information is not the problem usually. You'll get a newspaper, you'll get a social media, you'll get a television, and other ways of information. But people are interested in concise 2 lines or 1 page. Where are we going? What's happening? And that's usually the most difficult. You need the expert, involvement to really process all that, and in almost real time to get back and say, this is what's happening in this space. So that's what I mean, that in plenty of information, but analysis we need to do a lot more in general.
Yeah, you have the last word. Yeah.
Well, so it won't be the last word, but I'll put it this way. The bad news, I think, is most of the negotiations actually happen within the governments rather than between governments, because I think government agencies can't agree on most of these issues precisely for the reasons Rakesh Sood has highlighted. And those are slow and complicated and with highly conflicted interests. That's the bad news. The good news, I think, is that the more sophisticated players on the commercial side actually understand that some things are coming together, that quality assurance and customer trust and export control compliance and licensing arrangement and safety all propel you to do certain things and refrain from others in ways that are transparent, principled, and so on. And so to me, the government should intervene on the edges where the things are very clear. What we should really put the onus, but help, is through putting aside antitrust issues and so on, help the people in the private sector, perhaps facilitate by NGOs such as Carnegie India and so on, propel those ideas of self-responsibility in proceeding through the space and so on. And that is not a national aspect, but it's an international one.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of this panel. I mean, I think let me conclude this by essentially stating 3 things I think we can take away from here. One, I think the international environment is changing in relation to technology, whether the way the production chains are organized, the way the controls over these technologies, how they're going to come about. All these are in flux, and Bangalore will get affected. I think what's going to happen in the world will have a direct impact on how the technology space is organized in the city, and I think we've got to be prepared for it.
And hopefully the other way around too, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's my second point, that we cannot, I think war, or said, is too important to be left to the generals. Today, the technology policy is too important to be left to the governments alone. That the governments do not have the capacity or competence, therefore, it needs a much wider effort within the society, that we need contribution from others. And we've seen in the international side, Microsoft pushing for one type of cyber code of conduct. So I think the private sector, not just because they're large giants, but today the technological competence is outside the government, and that brings me that if we don't act, that if we don't contribute to shaping the discourse, as they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I think Bangalore should, I think, gear up, get together to be able to contribute to the national discourse. And I think how we shape our national discourse will in turn have, that's my last point, that we can influence the international debate, given the size and capability of India as a whole, that it's important that India can contribute to a larger global engagement on technology issues, for which the technology community, the entrepreneurs, and the business must play their natural and legitimate role. So let me stop here and invite all of you to please thank our panel, which has set us off on an excellent show.
Thank you, panelists, for that very interesting discussion. Our next panel is on data flows in the digital age, a subject which has been a key issue in India's conversation on data protection recently. As India continues to debate and create its own model on data flows, we are excited to host our next speakers to highlight and share their views on the subject. I would like to welcome on stage our panelists, Rob Sherman, Facebook, Sanjay Jain, iSPIRT and IIM Ahmedabad, Smriti Parsheera, NIPFP, Sunil Abraham, Center for Internet and Society, and Sahil Kinney, iSPIRT.
On a topic that is very germane to our lives, and most of us don't realize it yet. The title of the panel is Data Flows in the Digital Age, and I think we're going to spend the next hour talking about the major transition that India finds itself on the cusp of. We've spent the last 3 or 4 years building these public digital platforms, which we collectively refer to as the India Stack, spanning payments, identity, document sharing,